The concept of a railway to carry Muslims on the annual pilgrimage to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina can be traced back to the 1860s. Nevertheless, it was to be another 40 years before construction started, the railway taking its name from the Hejaz, that part of Arabia through which the line passes. Built to the unusual gauge of 1.05 metres, it is perhaps surprising that the railway has survived at all. But survived it has, and the southernmost part of the original line towards Mecca is now a modern phosphate-carrying freight railway. The survival of Jordan's steam locomotives is probably due as much to a kind climate and the fact that no one has got around to scrapping them as to any other reason. Nevertheless, the survival of steam and the expertise that goes with it means that 2 or 3 steam rail tours each year are usually run for the benefit of visiting enthusiasts. This May 1994 rail tour heads south from Amman behind locomotive number 51, a number painted in Arabic numerals on the tender. She's a German-built Young 282, one of 3 delivered in 1955. Number 71 is a 282 from the Belgian manufacturer Heinz & Pierre, delivered in 1956. She's working the special train north of Amman, near to the town of Zirka. As the train enters the outskirts of Amman, it passes various dump locomotives. In 1952, three big 282s were obtained from Robert Stevenson and Hawthorne. Amazingly, Loco number 23 is steamable, just. But she's unable to do more than limp painfully down the yard for photographers, although when delivered, the three engines were the most powerful on the system. Number 23 hasn't been steamed for almost a year, and the crew, not surprisingly, are taking it very gingerly indeed. Even so, numbers 23 and 71 coupled together make an attractive pairing, if only for photography. Shortly after filming was completed, a pipe burst in number 23's cab, causing a very smart evacuation of the driver and fireman. We don't know if number 23 will ever steam again. Numbers 51 and 71 share the shed at Amman. Number 51 causes excitement by setting fire to debris left in the ash pit. After picking up a water wagon, number 51 crosses an unprotected main road in Amman. While put forward as a religious railway, there is no doubt that it also had both military and economic aims, primarily to maintain an Ottoman hold on their not inconsequential Arabian Empire. For those on the annual Hajj, the pilgrimage which Muslims must make at least once in their lives, the idea of rail transport was most attractive. To the Sultan of Turkey, it held the further advantage of strengthening his hold over an area containing a sizable Arab population. The Sultan did not want a line financed by European money and operated by foreigners. The nature of the pilgrimage meant that the use of non-Muslim railway staff was unthinkable. The emphasis of religious aspects was paramount during fundraising. Muslim countries alone financed the building of the line, although it subsequently proved necessary to import European civil and mechanical engineering skills. Muslims throughout the Ottoman Empire were urged to donate funds, even collections from school children being used, as well as percentage deductions from Turkish civil servants and soldiers. Construction work was carried out almost entirely by Turkish soldiers and was hampered by, amongst other things, outbreaks of dysentery, typhoid fever, cholera and scurvy. The Hejaz Railway features many viaducts over what appears to be nothing, but were it not for these viaducts, the line would be quickly swept away by the rainfall from torrential desert storms which occur at intervals of several years. At Amman, number 51 is turned with the aid of some muscle power for another run into the desert. Number 51's driver is 79 years old and highlights the problem of finding experienced staff faced by railway administrations trying to keep steam running into the 1990s and beyond. Water provision for both staff and locomotives has always been problematic. Some stations had large cisterns where winter precipitation could be collected. but evaporation then became a problem during the summer months. The water tank car has long been a feature of Hejaz steam operations. The line achieved notoriety thanks to the efforts of Lawrence of Arabia during the First World War. He skillfully raided the line in such a way as to cause the Turks to defend it. Lawrence was careful never to damage the line beyond repair. In this way, Turkish troops were drawn away from the main Palestinian battlefronts, thereby reducing opposition to Allied forces. The Syrian portion of the Hejaz Railway has been under separate control since 1918. As late as 1993, the occasional revenue freight ran behind steam between Damascus and Deraa, and these trains may still run occasionally. At the border station of Deraa, it's possible to briefly enjoy the sight of Jordanian and Syrian locomotives alongside one another, an extremely special occasion. Syria has just 3 serviceable steam locomotives. Usual performers are 2 Hartmann 282s. This is number 260. And despite the rather doubtful condition of the track, the loco crew are quite prepared to let number 260 show her paces. Also available for special workings is number 755, a Swiss-built SLM product dating from 1894. She's leaving the attractive station in Damascus for the short run alongside the city's streets to Kedem workshops, 5 kilometres further south. Qidem is loco depot and workshops for the 1.05 metre gauge lines in Syria and is the final resting place for several dumped locomotives. Qidem is a fully equipped workshop capable of carrying out major repairs to the albeit now small fleet of serviceable engines. Level crossing protection through the streets of Damascus is quite simple. You just hang on to the whistle cord and hope for the best. The special train ventured onto the former Chemin de Fer Hammer et Prolongement, or DHP. This organisation, also to a gauge of 1.05 metres, and once the Hejaz main rival, formed the main line through the mountains into the Lebanon and onto Beirut. After many years of financial struggle, the DHP system was absorbed into Syria's Chemin de Fer de Hejaz in 1956. The line is still open and operates between May and September to take the population to the cool of the hills above the city. Number 755, being an ex-DHP engine, is on home territory here, climbing towards the Lebanese border on the former trunk line to Beirut. She still looks the part, even though she bears evidence of encounters with line-side vegetation. The train now arrives at the mountain town of Segaya, close to the Lebanese border. From here the train must return to Damascus, as the former DHP mainline onwards to Riyadh and Beirut is no longer passable. In Damascus, Hartmann 282 number 260 backs into the station for another run into the desert. She's one of 6 superheated machines built for Syrian operations in 1918. Much of the Hejaz main line south from Damascus traverses rather bland, featureless countryside. The rather battered saloon, with no glass in the windows and a solitary jar of flowers on the table as a reminder of former glories, is reputed to have been used by General de Gaulle when making state visits to Syria. In July 1912, a branch line opened from Deraa to Bosra. 33 kilometres long, it served the centre of the Haran, a major wheat-growing area. It was also close to a major centre of anti-Ottoman rebellion, and it is likely that the aim of the line's construction was not entirely commercial. However, it's now almost completely closed, seeing only the odd charter or special train to events at a nearby Roman amphitheatre. All this is a far cry from the 3 times a week passenger which ran in 1944, operated as required either by Borsig 280s or de Dion-Bouton rail cars. Here, as elsewhere, the motor vehicle has made its presence felt. Now, Movements over the branch are so infrequent as to be a source of much excitement to the local youthful population. Before leaving Arabia, there's just time to take a look at Dera R's pilot engine. She's number 66, originally a young 260, but now devoid of works plates. She's been rebuilt as a 260 tank, and later given a Borsig four-wheel tender. This was to increase her range between water stops when she made daily trips to Haifa. But she's been confined to barracks as the pilot engine since 1946. But Dera R doesn't need a pilot engine now, and these shots, taken in June 1994, show number 66 in steam for only the second time in 8 years. A very special event. It is probably necessary to actually visit India to fully appreciate the tangible but indescribable atmosphere that surrounds its British-built railways, which heave with both human and animal life and activity of all kinds. Official and unofficial use is made of the railway not only for transport, but also as a place of business, residence, dormitory, repository, refectory, mortuary, lavatory, menagerie and laundry, not to mention a source of energy, food and income. In the mid-70s, over 6,000 steam locomotives existed on 3 gauges, and, aided and abetted by growing fleets of diesels and electrics, helped to move Indian Railways 3,300 million annual passengers. India, despite her 100-fold problems, has an enterprising and courageous history in producing both steam and more modern locomotives. The result of this policy is that on the broad gauge at least, steam traction in this former railfans' mecca is almost at an end. These women dive eagerly into the ash pit just vacated by the bullet-nosed WP Class Pacific, in search of hot coals or usable chunks of unburnt fuel. WP Pacifics are the epitome of Indian broad gauge steam, and these sleek, stylish machines once handled many heavy long-distance passenger and mail trains. During World War II, American-designed broad and meter-gauge locos worked in India for the first time. Their ruggedness suited the hostile conditions on the subcontinent, and this led to an order being placed with the Baldwin Locomotive Company for the first batch of a new standard range of locomotives. The first WP was delivered in 1946, and many more were built in India's own Chittaranjan locomotive works. Although the standard WG-282s totalled well over 2,000, various batches of WPs from different countries meant a total of 755 altogether. These WPs are eking out their last months of working secondary passenger services from Saharanpur Shed in northern India in March 1993. Shed staff have not lost their pride, and considerable quantities of elbow grease are dispensed daily to ensure standards are maintained, at least in appearance. Here, WP number 7015 leaves Saharanpur on train 352 to Lucknow, with steam apparently escaping from every joint. Most signalling on lines in India is very, very British, but these semaphores follow American patterns. Another WP is entering Kandla with a passenger train from Delhi Junction, as another WP waits for the road. Here, another work-weary WP leaves Moradabad with a mixed train, amongst the rather more familiar and very typical array of semaphores. A former viceroy is reported to have commented that while broad gauge was okay when an elephant's load was contemplated, meter gauge or narrower would suffice when only donkey's loads were needed. This is meter gauge YP Class Pacific number 2150, entering Jaipur on the once daily train 253 from Todarai Singh. Narrow gauge doesn't mean little trains over short distances. Here, another YP number 2178 leaves Chittorgarh with the Hyderabad Ajmer train 582. Journey time is 51 hours and steam hauled throughout in 1993. The YP is one of the most widespread classes of meter gauge locos still in service. The class is another type introduced by America after the war and built in large numbers both within India and elsewhere. Number 2777 has been cleaned for visiting photographers by its driver Mr. De Lemos, and the job has taken him 2 days. Here Mr. De Lemos eases his YP away from Jaipur on train 132 to Chittorgarh. In the heart of the Ganges Plain lies a truly astonishing steam survivor. This meter gauge 040 tender locomotive is earning her living at the Soraya sugar factory at Siddharnagar. And while the loco is meter gauge, the wagons are only 2 foot 6 inches, making this a mixed gauge train. Tweed is a 121-year-old Sharp Stewart, originating from Glasgow in 1873. Tweed and her sister Mersey at the nearby Hathua factory must surely be the oldest revenue-earning steam locomotives in service anywhere. On the left, with tender towards the camera, is O-Class 440 number 54. She's from Vulcan Foundry, built in 1884. And it must be a good design, as 3 more virtually identical engines were built by Bagnalls of Stafford as late as 1943. "37393 is one of 12 metre-gauge Swiss-built X-Class 082 tanks, delivered to India between 1914 and 1938. These are the only locos to work the line to the hill station of Uttakamund in southern India. The first 12 miles are over a steamy floodplain, but at Kalar the climb begins. The 1 in 12.5 gradient necessitates the use of rack and pinion. The Swiss ABD system is used and is similar to that found on the Snowdon Mountain Railway. When the line was first opened, hopelessly ineffectual small Bear Peacock tanks were employed, followed by bigger North British engines, but with all the important bits hidden away where they couldn't be maintained. It's little wonder that India turned to the mountain railway professionals to provide powerful, reliable locomotives. The locomotive pushing at the rear means a superb view for passengers in the leading coach, even though this is supposed to be a freight train. The station name Hillgrove is a poignant reminder of the days when the Raj ruled the tea plantations in the Nilgiri Hills. Kuno is a small market town and marks the end of the rack section. Here, the gradient becomes a more manageable 1 in 25, which the big Swiss locomotive can manage by adhesion alone. Nevertheless, the engine stays at the rear to avoid the risk of a breakaway. Hill stations became popular during the days of British rule as resorts where the empire's administrators could escape from the humidity of the plains to the cooler, more rarefied mountain air. Uticamund, since renamed Udigamandalam, was the hill station for Madras, and despite the ideological renaming, the town is almost universally known simply as Ooty. The daily passenger from Kunar is climbing through the Nilgiris, or Blue Hills, bound for Ooty in February 1994. Like other Indian railways to hill stations, this line has been troubled by landslips, and for this reason only one train each way is timetabled. The engine is another X-Class, number 37392. The line has been subject to closure attempts due to declining usage, but thankfully these have so far been unsuccessful. India is home to one of the true railway wonders of the world, the Darjeeling Himalayan line, which uses a fleet of 040 tanks on its twisting journey from the broad gauge junction here at New Jalpaiguri to the premier hill resort of Darjeeling, bringing Indian rails to their highest point at 8,200 feet. Some of the B-class locos date from the last century, although some rebuilding has taken place. They have side, saddle and well tanks and have an authorised trailing load of just 32 tonnes. And despite many problems of damaged earthworks and civil unrest, traffic is still being handled on this superb line which conquers the Himalayas by means of numerous spirals, loops, switchbacks and seemingly impossible curvature. There's nothing unusual about a loco crew of 5: driver, fireman, 2 human sanders, and someone to break up the bigger lumps of coal. At Kurseong, the locomotive is laboriously coaled by hand, with a grace, dignity and patience so typical of Indian railway workers. Indian railways are the country's largest employers, and such labour-intensive procedures point to a completely different working culture. The lack of suitable diesels and the uncomfortable alternative journey by road are just 2 reasons why this line has survived against the odds, although there have been periods of disuse when most enthusiasts thought the line's working days were over. As the railway leaves Kurseong, the train must negotiate the town's colourful and chaotic street bazaar. The Darjeeling line is, at the moment, still operating, and is surely by itself enough to justify a visit to the magical, colourful and unforgettable railways of India. Demand for rail transport exceeds supply in many parts of the Indian subcontinent, but they've got it down to a fine art on what's left of the 2-foot 6-inch gauge Nepal government railways, which once ran, amongst other gems, a small fleet of Garretts. This engine's a beautiful 1926-built Avonside 062 tank, and the train is the afternoon passenger from Janagar to Janakpur. This is a short special for a group of British photographers, headed by a rather optimistically liveried but most attractive narrow-gauge Hunslet, also built in 1926. Some Nepalese locomotives are named after gods, although this doesn't seem to have had much effect on the railway's fortunes. Pakistan's most scenic railway is undoubtedly the 32-mile branch from the lower station at Jamrud up the Khyber Pass to the border with Afghanistan. Close to foreign visitors throughout much of the 1980s, its ruling gradient of 1 in 33 was just too much for the diesels of the day, resulting in steam's continued use on the line during its brief periods of operation. The line's scenic potential is now being exploited, and two specially prepared HGS Class 280s, one at each end of the short train, now tackle the switchback route to Landi Kotal. Madana is the first point where reversal is necessary. The tank wagon is for extra water and is normal on steam-hauled trains throughout Pakistan. Despite the high ratio of loco power to train weight, all the efforts of both engines are needed to tackle the gradient. The train arrives at Shanghai, where reversal takes place for the second time. The HGS 280s were designed by the British Engineering Standards Association, which was responsible for many loco types for India prior to independence in 1948. Although long since superseded in India, a few BESA types survive in Pakistan. And if you think these engines bear more than a passing resemblance to the Robinson 280s of the Great Central, then you'd be right, as Mr. Robinson was involved in the conception of these handsome, heavy goods, superheated engines. The stark mountain scenery and the innumerable tunnels make this route an obvious one for the running of tourist trains. Arrival at the border station of Landi Kotal at 3,496 feet allows one to reflect on the original purpose of the line, construction by the British to transport troops to the Afghan border. And it's only now that tensions have eased sufficiently to allow regular tourist trains to run, although the locals seem to think that some risk still persists. Let us hope that this initiative will allow many more rail enthusiasts to steam along up the Khyber. Probably the most famous survivors of the British Engineering Standards Association are the SBS Class 440s, of which several examples still survive, working local passenger trains over the fairly level lines out of Malakwal in central Pakistan. Amazingly, this class was only discovered to have survived in any quantity by adventurous British bounty hunters in the early 70s, since when Malakwal has become something of a magnet for Pakistan-bound steam enthusiasts. In Pakistan, as elsewhere, steam survives in industry. This is the 2-foot gauge Changa-Manga Forestry Railway. The locomotive is a Fowler 040 tender well tank built in 1927, works number 17208. This railway uses loco works numbers as running numbers for day-to-day operations. Not unnaturally for a forest railway, the engines are wood burners. The line's other loco is Andrew Barclay 040 tender well tank number 1763. The advert for a universally available soft drink on the tender is a sign that the tourist industry is catching up. This line runs passenger trains on Fridays, the Muslim holy day. Empties are taken out to the forest for loading, alongside the road, a common arrangement for many industrial tramway-style operations. Another feature common on industrial lines is permanent way of a decidedly substandard nature, but adequate for the job in hand. Now that the wagons are loaded, the small Fowler must be worked hard to move the not inconsiderable tonnage back to the woodyard. The idyllic but politically troubled island of Sri Lanka boasts not only fine scenery and spectacular wildlife, but also over 850 miles of broad gauge railway, plus a few more of narrow gauge. Most routes lead to the island's capital, Colombo. Although dieselisation was complete by 1981, we're indebted to Clifford Jones, a travel agent from Eccles, whose efforts have ensured that 4 broad-gauge 460s are available for special trains. Mr. Jones saw the derelict locos in 1985, and with the help of a local Sri Lankan travel agent and the then railway general manager, the Viceroy Special tourist train was born. Number 340 Frederick North is a Class B1D 460, built by Stevenson and Hawthorne at Darlington in 1945. Like many passenger engines on the island, she follows the tradition of being named after former governors or prominent personages. The central area of the island is a most attractive mountainous region, with many steep gradients which require the combined efforts of two locomotives. The banking engine, which isn't doing its fair share at the moment, is number 213, a Class B2B 460 tender tank, delivered from Vulcan Foundry in 1922. The tender has an unusual rigid axle and a four-wheel bogie arrangement, designed to give more even weight distribution. The British parentage of both the locomotive and signalling systems is evident here, as both locomotives team up to haul the Viceroy Special. Thanks to the foresight of the Government Railway Administration in not removing turntables or watering facilities, the Viceroy Special is available for charter over virtually the whole of the Sri Lankan broad gauge network. With perhaps just a hint of stage management, number 340 makes another spectacular departure. The railways of the island were both built and controlled by the Ceylon government from day one, and extended steadily into the mountains during the latter decades of the 19th century. Ceylon's rail network was complete by 1925. Sri Lanka's only narrow gauge line runs in a southeasterly direction from Colombo's Maradana station for some 36 miles to Avisawala. 3 of these chunky Hunslet 464 tanks survive. Number 220, seen here, is serviceable, and her sisters, numbers 291 and 292, are reportedly being overhauled. steam never really died on the narrow gauge, with number 220 and her stablemates covering diesel failures or the odd spot of shunting as required. On the narrow gauge too, water columns have been retained, which means that steam operation can be arranged without too much difficulty. Number 220 was built in 1924 and is classified as Class J1. The narrow gauge is steadily being re-gauged to the broad 5-foot 6-inch gauge, but fortunately the 2-foot 6-inch capability is being retained as mixed track, at least for the moment. Avisawala is the terminus of the narrow gauge, although until 1975 it ran considerably further to Openake and the southern foothills. There can be absolutely no doubt that the pièce de résistance of the former Ceylon government railway is this beautifully restored Sentinel steam rail car. Running on what looks like Hornby 003 rail track, this magnificent contraption was restored to full working order in 1990 and is now available for charter. She was built by Sentinel of Shrewsbury in 1928 and is the only serviceable Sentinel steam rail car anywhere in the world. She carries the Sri Lankan classification V2 and is about as far from an LNER mixed traffic 262 as it's possible to get. Repatriation to Great Britain has been mooted, but these are home rails, and as long as she can run in Sri Lanka, then that is where she should stay.